Our, um, our next speaker is Joël Nadeau-Gauthier. It says independent researcher, but a former student of ours. So we're so very pleased to welcome him today, who's been doing some work out past Quebec City on some beautiful places called Kamouraska. C'est vraiment un honneur de te recevoir, de te présenter.
The honor is for me, and actually thanks for the title, because I didn't know myself what I am before I came here, so it's good to know what I am. Thanks everyone for being here, and for those of you who are here with us since yesterday, thanks for being alive again. Before I have to start this presentation, I have to mention that what I'm about to present you today is not only my work, it's a collective reflection alongside with my colleague, Vincent Perron and Denis Lahaye, that are here today. And it's a poetic and abstract experiment on the representation of the territory and some of its architectural entities. These drawing experiments seeks to provoke discussion and question or perception of inhabited, forgotten, or unknown places. They also seek to question our relationship to documentation, archiving, and memories of places, both in its physical form and its collective value. Our collective I've set up in the Bas-Saint-Laurent region, and for those of you who are not really familiar with Quebec territory, we're located about 400 kilometers east from Montreal. It's mainly agricultural land, of course, and there's a numerous amount of building lying in ruins, lying in the region. Barns, farmer house, silos, factories, what we like to call silent and static witnesses of an evolving land. Yet the curious thing about it is they became mostly invisible structure to most eyes, as I guess their long-time presence on the territory has related them to a banal object of the landscape. But for us, they become a visceral source of obsession. They might be uninhabited for decades, but how come they inhabit our minds permanently? I guess it's an unexplainable feeling of nostalgia, curiosity about the forbidden, the forgotten, or simply their cinematic and poetic structure that makes them vessels to untold stories. In the same ways as wasteland or industrial ruins in urban contexts, these structures in the territory become the theater of a weird, strange time. Something long time gone, something to happen, or maybe just the feeling of an internal presence. Yet as their disappearance is inevitable, we might as well celebrate their death and signify their existence one last time. This is where the intention of our documentation started. It's bringing back the event of death as, I would say, an intelligible, symbolic, and social meaning where this experimentation will lead to the creation of sort of rituals. As these rituals may take many forms, as we already experiment sort of dead walking structure around the territory, or on-site intervention was actually a musical performance, which was a funeral ode to the building that we made. Of course, the drawing has to be part, alongside with the others, to the process. We had to archive this site beyond the standard and conventional architectural drawing to provoke and engage discussion on the territory, which, in my opinion, is a shared concern. We thought that it's only through our representation of reality that we'll be able to express the fragmentation, the ruins, the loss, where intertwined temporality, territory, prestige, matters, and I guess also our personal obsession. Our work seeks to highlight this found tension between the perceived and imagined world and direct the viewers toward the transformed reality. To do so, we have settled in the room, setting up dialogues between our memories, places, histories, drawings, of course, so it would evolve into a polyphonic work. It results in three radical different forms of drawing, having sort of discussion between them. Now, before I start with the first experiment, I guess I have to ask you this question. Have you ever been to a place that you've been through and through, a place that you know like no others. Walking through it is like an automatism, a routine, and then one day as you turn around the corner, you're falling face to face with an empty spaces. You know there was something there, yet your memory is not really able to define clearly what it was. It's like an unclear image of a ghost. And as maybe today a quick Google Street View may reconstruct your memory in most urban contexts, regional roads remain mostly undocumented passages. Walking slowly day to day around a site, as urban context might be more suitable for it, and driving your car quickly across the territory makes the relationship to the documentation drastically different, considering also the amount of distance to be traveled. Our own eyes define the territory in a very pictorial, scenic way, fragment by fragment, and each loss we notice seems lost forever, which I guess comes this urge for documentation. What happens if there is a deliberate loss of data and the representation? What if what we're trying to capture is the fragment of memory of that instant moment, that shape that appears inside your head? It's like when you blink. Actually, what we're trying to do, I like to say it's like trying to draw a whisper. The drawing itself becomes frustrating. It represents this memory that keeps trying to slip out of your hand, fading slowly away. The drawing is calling for its own disappearance. It's like the time slowly passing by. The representation has no spatial or temporal references, which around, I guess, we make the distinction between the present and the represented. The image now leaves place to any observer to conceive its own conception of reality, or to leave behind just a sensation, a feeling of something strangely familiar. It is the expression of an event which occurs but you can't reach. It's like a mirage. These drawings were made on a bituminous cardboard with black pigment so it could absorb the maximum of light, which also makes them pretty unstable depending on the room you're studying in. Next experiment on its opposite. The medium used for the drawing itself is a spatial and temporal references. The map is usually an object that we pay attention to it, we scrutinize it carefully, slowly. And I guess we keep it as a fundamental proof that our world exists beyond our daily landscape. It is a reference to what I would say an absolute reality. It's also an object of desire to discover unknown places, and it's usually a document that we attempt to preserve, to care. So for me, drawing directly on a map was a really conflicting action for me, but it's precisely this dichotomy between the two representations that become interesting. It became a conversation. Space, time, reality, subject, scale become a narrative framework revolving around this absolute. It created this tension between the complexity of a codified landscape, ordered, and the imagined representation of these building fragments. And as I'm drawing, unplanned association began to emerge between the maps and the draw fragments, and discussion that tells their own stories. The represented fragment within this fictional scene reaffirm the passage of time, and therefore the building history, my personal history, and the history of the observer that might emerge from this fiction. And I guess it's also perceivable on the drawing as body, shapes, and character emerge, the psychological correlation between these building fragments and my personal experience. It's intuition, feeling, hallucination around these entities. Even though none of this drawing is trying to reveal a precise reference of space and time, because as far as we know, they might be already dead, alive, or maybe they just never exist. But by using map, it seems to be possible to keep a bridge between the observer and the revelation of this imaginary and its own position in the world. I would say it's like a feat on earth through the fiction. It allows the critical position taken by the documentation to be signified, which in this case is the disappearance of these entities. Slowly, each map on the territory were assembled together and leave the fragment open to dialogue and interpretation. And we can imagine that this work can go on as long as there will be territory, as long as there will be map. Each little piece of land hanging its long little stories, and endless documentation. class of experiments, which I would call fantasies, and endless documentation to another. What if the documentation has no precise intention, except getting lost within the subject, continuously fed by the context of the author, the room where we're standing and where the mourning, the rituals, and fantasies drawing were made, and also the territory around that room. Tree drawn building, whether they're from a memory, from a picture, or from someone else's memory, or maybe just from my imagination, does not matter. Of the ongoing process of the drawing is the only real context. The act of drawing becomes a reflection upon itself, starting to draw with a vague intention and leave the time, line by line, to define what's going to happen next. The project will naturally be a victim of its past interversion, and as time goes by, there will be less and less room for uncertainty. Drawing yourself into your own obsession. There's no beginning, no end, only the desire for repetition. It brings the observer in the drawing where it's purposely no delimitation between what's fiction and what is real. And to do so, the drawing accepts its accidental and informal aspect and use them as a stable context for their next interversion. It sometimes seems that this fiction attracts us so convincingly that we attempt to accept it more as a reality than what we know as a reality. In each interversion are kept through the project, the drawing is an ongoing documentation of the drawing itself. A drawing that becomes a spontaneous delirium where the building is the only stable object. It is the vessel to a new universe. These drawings were made on gypsum board, and as we never build and destroy so much architecture as today, I guess it's become sort of a paradox. It's not a very long-lasting material. The drawing itself would become ruined quickly. So, is this archiving? Is this tangible documentation? I guess there's no direct answer to the question, but I would like to finish this presentation with a little anecdote that comes to my head. It's actually from a very famous poet that we had in Quebec, which was called Claude Gauvreau. He was a major figure of the automatism movement back in the 60s, 70s. And along his process of poem, at some point he started to transform word, created his own kind of world and words through his project. And then in one interview, he was asked if he was not pretentious to still call it French by inventing words. And he answered by, and I quote him, I can certainly have the pretension to invent word if it means enrich a language. And I think this sentence is very important as I transpose it to the work, that I think we can certainly have the pretension to invent stories if it means enrich a history and a memory. The act of representation gives a sense to these sites. It introduces a new temporal dimension. It allows the possibility of a new present for them, physically or not. The only important thing now is they lie somewhere in our collective memory, ready to be distorted and reinterpreted. And it's through this interpretation and formulation that it's a new form of collective memory that will slowly take place in the space to the scale of our societies and in our culture. Thanks. It's a good time to philosophize on death if you want.
There's a first question here, but just like, je peux-tu retourner au dessin noir because we turned off the spotlight that we're probably like watching.
On the screen actually it was better than on the. But it's a whisper.
En français ou en anglais? En anglais?
Comme tu le sens.
Le choix. Bon, moi je suis absolument extrêmement heureuse de voir qu'il y a une relève, justement, qui, dans votre travail, que ce soit l'apport architectural ou l'apport d'inclure Gauvreau là-dedans, là, c'est chapeau. Et ça fait vraiment plaisir qu'il y ait une telle force dans votre travail. C'est vraiment, moi, ça me touche énormément. Et je vous félicite. Et puis, continuez.
Merci beaucoup.
I may have, because maybe that wasn't quite They were encouragements, very, very kind encouragements. Because you all draw,
Yeah.
in the practice,
But
and are they collectively produced?
We never touch each other's drawing. The drawing only involves between us, between our discussion. We never touch each other, but we were in the same room, and it's exactly what it's.
Not even when the other one's not there. But and also the second part to this, because I really want to know maybe how you draw collectively, even if you don't touch the drawings, there's still dialogue happening around drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But also like your relationship to drawing something that's so tied to the land, because you start with these beautiful photos, and knowing that part of the province, I'm immediately transported there. But so there's such a connection to the land and the culture. And I'm just wondering, you show us a studio that's quite closed, great space, but then like, do you draw outside? Like, are you on site sketching? Like, is there a part of this that's tied to the?
We didn't do much of sketches on sites, I guess, because we were really trying on this experiment to experience how only this image of your memory can be transposed, and through how when we were talking together, there was a documentation photograph, of course, but at some points we were trying to define exactly sometimes when I was talking about this feeling of something that you've seen and then disappeared. It happens a lot when we were traveling around the territory, and just there was something there and then it's not there anymore, and it's super frustrating. We're just trying to talk about this feeling that we had, that we saw in this kind of image. So we try to rebuild the more as possible of what have been lost. And but no, we didn't do much sketching on site. It was really based in the room where we were working.
C'est de Carole. Il y a d'autres personnes. Thank you so much, Joël, for this beautiful presentation. I love the black on black paintings and drawings. I recently read L'habitude de la ruine, a bit depressing, but true. And your drawings reconcile us with how beautiful our regions are. Could you tell us a bit more about the collective and all these drawings word collectively? Okay, Carole, je vois que c'est. Are you from Kamouraska? It seems to me that to draw whispers and memories of a place, one needs to know it intimately. How much time do you spend in one place before you draw it?
Well, I'm not from there, but I'm nearly from there, maybe 1 hour. How much time I spend? I don't know. It's just well, for the past 3 years, we haven't moved that much anyway because it was pandemic, so we're just traveling really a lot around the territory. And I guess the first drawing, like these drawings will all pass the last 3 months. We really decided it was 3 months, and maybe we started documented and take picture and driving around these sites for the past 3 years since the moment we arrived there. And yes, for me, I still grew up in the countryside, so it's inherent to me. These shapes are something really familiar, and even I think the three of us are not from Montreal, so it was all for us this kind of really distinct shapes that we really were intrigued for many years. And so it's a long time process, I guess, long time reflection before we made the action of starting documenting these sites and give them a meaning. And like when we unlock the key of the death rituals, it opens a lot of way to explain, and a lot of forms of rituals and drawings can be merged into a lot of different interversion. So I don't know if it answered your question.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I mean, it's a really wonderful, haunting image. I wanted to ask. This is a question I don't know the answer to, but I thought it would be, potentially interesting to ask it, because I think it's it perhaps touches on other things that we've seen over the 2 days as well. And that's, there's a sense that images, their memory images, have to be on the point of disappearing. They have to be blurred and fading, receding into the distance.
Mm-hmm.
The skeptical position, I mean, if I was, a skeptic, I would say that's in danger of being a cliche. I mean, it cannot be the case that memories are very sharp and actually too sharp. And one of the problems with memories is that they can be overly sharp.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder if there's a kind of a, rhetoric of the memory image that is, kind of assumed that it's on the point of fading and disappearing in the way that a photograph might fade and disappear if exposed to the light too much, or that a blueprint might fade. I don't know that. I mean, I just I don't have a sort of position on this, but I think it's quite interesting to reflect upon.
So the question is, sorry. The fading,
Sorry, yes. The question
fading,
is, I just want to put a bit of pressure on the assumption that images to do with memory have to be fading out, blurred, on the point of disappearing. Because there's another way of thinking about memory that is actually...
well, I mean, the other drawings also are not in the same time. But I guess it's not even a question of... I think the things in this drawing was actually more about the frustration. We wanted to make the drawing, I think, frustrating to be seen like this and represent this kind of feeling that we had. It was not necessarily likely to be like, oh, we want to try to represent a ghost or something. It was like, how do you materialize physically in the drawing this feeling of frustration of something that is skipping out of your head, more than just the feeling of something disappearing, I think. And the drawing itself is, depending on the light, you don't necessarily know where it is. And for other drawings, we use really detailed memory. Also, it depends on the situation and the feeling that we had over the building, I think. Other drawings were also left on the building, left to be dead with the building, so we try to experiment different way of expressing this.
I was wondering what role, because it's like you're using the drawing to create some kind of collective memory or to grasp the collective memory. And I was wondering about if you were also writing in your artistic practice, or what was the role of storytelling and using words or writing in your practice?
As I said at the beginning, the drawings are part of rituals that contains three things: the introversion, the performance, and the documentation. And in both cases, we write, of course, and when we talk about histories, for example, the burning kind of structure that I showed at the beginning was this idea of, and we wrote actually a document that was called, there's no translation, I think, Les Pleureuses, from the Italian, the women that were hired to cry, that was the name of the project, and we wanted to define exactly collectively what is, and how do we define also at some points the reason why the people also doesn't really reconnect that much with this structure, with the built heritage. And to make it as a collective happening, we organize each year in Kamouraska village an exhibition where we show these drawings and these experiments to the people so they can connect to these things, because sometimes it seems that you just need to like put it back on site so people realize again that it's something important to them, or they're attached to it or something. And it seems that as the that ritual is something invariant to all human culture. Everybody can relate easily to this kind of feeling of celebrating this memory and this. Is it? Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some of yes, but not necessarily like I don't write a legend on the buildings, but the drawing itself, when we're drawing it, and there's sometimes like shapes or other structure merging through it, and it's like, yeah, it's like, for example, the walking structure, or like this kind of slow walker of the built heritage walking away that we just kind of merge into the drawings, but there's text around these and this kind of process and this historical meaning.
Merci beaucoup, Joël.